I was still a virgin at 32, until the widow spent 3 nights in my bed, 1886. In the winter of 1886, Elias Whitmore lived a life that few noticed and fewer understood. At 32, he was known in Cedar Ridge as a quiet, disciplined man who kept to himself, rising before dawn and returning home before nightfall. His small wooden house stood at the edge of town. Surrounded by land, he worked with care and patience. While others his age had families, laughter and shared meals, Elias had chosen, or perhaps resigned himself to, solitude. It was not that he despised companionship, rather he feared it. Society measured a man by marriage and confidence, and Elias felt he possessed neither. One evening, as the sky darkened and a bitter storm rolled in, an unexpected knock echoed through his home. Outside stood Mrs. Clara Hawthorne, a widow stranded by the storm after her carriage broke down miles away. Her face bore the quiet strength of someone who had endured loss, and her voice carried both exhaustion and dignity. Elias hesitated, fully aware of what the town might say if a widow stayed under his roof. Yet turning her away into the cold felt far more shameful. He invited her inside, offered warmth, and prepared a modest meal, keeping his distance out of respect. That first night passed calmly. They spoke little, yet the silence was not uncomfortable. Elias listened as Clara shared fragments of her journey and the grief that followed her husband's passing. For the first time in years, Elias found himself truly listening to another human being, not out of politeness, but genuine interest. Something shifted within him, subtle but undeniable. The storm did not ease the next day, forcing Clara to remain another night. This time, conversation came more easily. They spoke of expectations, of how the world left little room for those who did not follow its prescribed paths. Clara spoke honestly of loneliness, and Elias, surprised by his own courage, admitted his fear of judgment and failure. He realized then that his isolation had not protected him. It had imprisoned him. By the third night, the storm finally began to fade, but the connection between them had already left its mark. Nothing improper occurred, yet Elias felt transformed. Through simple conversation and shared silence, Clara had shown him that closeness did not require boldness or perfection, only sincerity. When morning came, Clara departed with gratitude and quiet grace. Elias stood watching her leave, aware that his home felt different, and so did he. The widow had not taken anything from him. Instead, she had awakened something long dormant, the courage to step beyond fear and allow life to reach him. In a world that had long passed him by, Elias Whitmore finally felt ready to move forward. Autumn arrived gently in Cedar Ridge, carrying with it cooler air and a sense of quiet completion. By then, Elias Whitmore had settled into a life that felt fuller than he ever imagined possible. He was no longer the man who measured his days by silence and avoidance. His routine remained simple: work, prayer, rest, but his spirit had changed. Where fear once ruled, reflection now guided him. The town had grown accustomed to seeing Elias among them. He was invited to gatherings, asked for help, and trusted with small responsibilities. None of this made him proud. Instead, it made him grateful. He understood now that belonging was not something granted by others, but something one allowed oneself to accept. The walls he had built over decades had not been torn down by force, but opened slowly through understanding. From time to time, Elias thought of Clara Hawthorne. Her presence no longer felt like a wound or a longing, but like a chapter that had taught him how to read his own life differently. He did not wait for her return, nor did he cling to the past. What she had given him could not be taken away by distance or time. It lived on in how he spoke, how he listened, and how he faced each day. One evening, as golden leaves fell across his land, Elias sat outside his home, watching the horizon fade into dusk. He reflected on how narrowly he had once defined honor, believing it meant withdrawal and restraint alone. Now he understood that honor also meant compassion, courage, and the willingness to stand openly in the world. A life untouched by connection was not purity, it was fear disguised as virtue. The years ahead remained unknown, but that uncertainty no longer troubled him. Whether he would marry, travel, or remain where he was mattered less than how he chose to live. He had learned that it was never too late to begin, and that even brief encounters could alter the course of a lifetime. As night settled over Cedar Ridge, Elias rose and returned indoors, carrying with him a quiet certainty. He was no longer defined by what he had missed, but by what he had embraced. In the stillness of his home, there was no emptiness now, only peace, earned through growth, humility, and the courage to finally live. Weeks passed after the widow's departure, yet her presence lingered in ways Elias Whitmore had never known before. The house that once felt sufficient in its quiet now echoed with absence, not of a person, but of connection. In 1886, Cedar Ridge moved at the same slow rhythm it always had. But Elias no longer moved with it unnoticed. Something within him had shifted, like soil turned over for the first time in years. Suddenly ready for new growth, he began with small changes. Elias stayed longer in town after selling his produce, exchanging polite words with shopkeepers instead of nodding and leaving. He attended Sunday service regularly, sitting not at the back as he once did, but among others. Though no one spoke of the storm or the widow, he felt eyes upon him, not with suspicion, but curiosity. To his surprise, the judgment he had feared never came. What came instead was a realization. Much of the fear that had governed his life had lived only in his own mind. At night, Elias reflected on the conversations he had shared with Clara Hawthorne. She had spoken of grief without bitterness and of strength without pride. Through her honesty, Elias had learned to examine his own heart. He understood now that purity and restraint meant little if they were born of fear rather than conviction. A life untouched by closeness was not virtue, it was avoidance. Spring approached, softening the land and Elias alike. One afternoon, he helped a neighbor repair a fence, something he would once have declined. The work was simple, but the shared labor brought an unfamiliar sense of belonging. Laughter followed, awkward but real. And, Elias felt himself becoming part of the world, rather than watching it from a distance. One evening a letter arrived. It was brief and unsigned beyond a familiar initial. Clara wrote only to thank him once, more for his kindness, and to say that some encounters, though brief, changed the direction of a life. Elias read the letter slowly, then folded it with care. There was no promise, no romance, only understanding, and that was enough. For the first time, Elias did not feel defined by what he lacked, but by what he was becoming. He began to see his future not as a closed path, but an open one. Whether or not Clara ever returned no longer mattered in the way it once might have. She had already given him something lasting, permission to live honestly and without fear. As the sun set over Cedar Ridge, Elias stood outside his home, watching the fields glow in fading light. He knew challenges would come, and loneliness might return at times. But now he also knew this. Life could change in a matter of days, and a single act of kindness could awaken a lifetime of courage. And this time Elias Whitmore was ready to walk forward, unafraid. By the summer of 1886, Elias Whitmore had become a man quietly in motion. The fields around his home flourished that year, and so did something unseen within him. He no longer worked only to pass the days. He worked with intention, rising each morning with a sense that life awaited him rather than merely endured. Cedar Ridge noticed the change, though few could name it. Elias spoke more, listened more, and for the first time allowed himself to be known. One afternoon, the town gathered for a modest seasonal fair. Elias had never attended such events before, finding comfort instead in solitude. But that day, he felt drawn by curiosity rather than obligation. He moved through the crowd with uncertainty, yet without retreat. Familiar faces greeted him, and conversations unfolded naturally. He realized that people had always been there. It was he who had kept himself distant. As the sun dipped low, Elias helped an elderly man who had stumbled near the edge of the square. The small act drew quiet appreciation, and in that moment, Elias understood how deeply he had misunderstood strength. Strength was not isolation, nor was it silence. It was presence. That evening, as he returned home, a familiar carriage appeared on the road ahead. His heart stirred, not with expectation, but recognition. Clara Hawthorne had returned to Cedar Ridge, this time by choice. She explained that her journey had led her back through the town, and she felt compelled to see the place where kindness had once met her at her lowest moment. There was no drama in her return, no declarations, only warmth and mutual respect. They spoke as equals now, two people changed by time and reflection. Clara noticed the difference in Elias immediately. He stood with quiet confidence, his words measured but sincere. He no longer hid behind fear. That night, she stayed again under his roof, as a guest and friend, with the same dignity as before. Yet the air between them felt lighter, no longer shaped by unspoken wounds. In the days that followed, Elias and Clara walked through the town together, not concerned with whispers or assumptions. They understood that their bond was not built on need, but on shared understanding. Whether their paths would remain joined was uncertain, but for the first time, uncertainty did not frighten Elias. When Clara eventually departed once more, Elias did not feel loss as he once might have. Instead, he felt gratitude. He had learned that a meaningful life was not defined by age, reputation, or past choices, but by the courage to grow when opportunity appeared. Standing alone beneath the open sky, Elias breathed deeply. He was no longer waiting for life to begin. It already had.